a restream. Dave.
Awesome. Everybody, welcome to Manufacturing Hub. If you're new here, the first couple of minutes are community comments, and then we'll go ahead and jump in with Mike. So we typically go at 4 o'clock, but today we've got a special 3 o'clock episode. We have, if you are longtime listeners, know that we've tried a whole bunch of time slots. So let us know if 3, 4 o'clock or something else works better for your Wednesday afternoons. If you have missed what we're doing so far this month, we're talking all about cybersecurity awareness. We've had a couple of really awesome conversations so far. So beginning of October, Pascal Ackerman kicked us off talking about all about ICS cybersecurity, talking about volume 1, volume 2 of the books that he's written. Again, I'm going to make the joke because he's not here to defend himself. Pascal, I'm not sure if volume 2 is a guidebook or like a deadly weapon. That thing is like 1,200 pages, and it's very good. But we had an amazing conversation with Pascal, and then last week we were talking all about offensive cybersecurity with Grant. We had an amazing conversation with that, talking about penetration testing, talking a little bit more about ransomware, kind of continuing to go down that path. And this week we've got Michael Lewis on. We'll let him introduce himself in just a minute. And we are talking all about defensive cybersecurity. And Mike has done some awesome things that we will get into in just a couple of minutes. And we will go on from that. We want to shout out Phoenix Contact. Thank you guys for sponsoring October and helping us put together this awesome set of shows. I think every month continues to get better. And if you agree, that's awesome. Go ahead and agree with me. And if you don't agree, you can send Vlad some hate mail because that's where Vlad's hate mail should go. Speaking of Vlad, we do have to embarrass him to start out every show. Mike, you may or may not have heard this part before, but Vlad runs a training site called Solus PLC. We're currently streaming on their YouTube, so we'll go wave to Solus PLC. Coming up on 34,000 subscribers. We've probably got 100 or a couple hundred people watching us at this moment. Hey, everyone. Yes, but please, if you're watching, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Now, Mike, I like to say Vlad doesn't ask for people to subscribe to his own YouTube channel. So if I ask people to subscribe, I can just take all the credit. We're gonna have to arm wrestle over that silver play button when
Thanks,
it
Dave. Always
comes
appreciated.
in. Absolutely. And while I ask you guys to subscribe in the beginning, I'm going to say please subscribe to Manufacturing Hub, follow Vlad, myself, follow Mike, and everyone else that we've got listed below. It helps the algorithm. And you guys can also check out our podcasts that come out on Thursday morning most of the time, like 99% Thursdays, 60% Thursday mornings. But no, without further ado, let's go ahead and jump in. Everyone, welcome to Manufacturing Hub. I'm Dave. This guy up here is Vlad. We are talking all about cybersecurity and cybersecurity awareness. This week, we've got a very special guest. He's got a slightly different background than most of our guests, but I think it's only going to make it better for the conversation. So Michael Lewis, welcome to the show. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Dave and Vlad. It's a pleasure. It's my first podcast, so I'm excited to be able to chat. And yeah, as you mentioned, I have a little bit of a different background, more from the IT side, but hopefully I can share some interesting perspective and my experience to date with some of the OT side of things as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Mike. I think it's going to be a great conversation. Before we get to the technical aspects, maybe could you give us an introduction? How did you get into IT? What was your maybe studies like? And what kind of, I also noticed some certifications on your profile that I want to
Mhm.
discuss. How was that process like?
Yeah, so great question. I started in IT kind of
Mhm.
um, the reverse of maybe what's typical. So when I graduated high school, I went to community college for a little bit. Was kind of trying to find out what I wanted to do. Figured that technology was a good area, a good field to get into. And rather than pursuing the college degree, I actually went and got a number of IT certifications before my actual college degree. So those included typical A plus certification, Net Plus, Security Plus,
Okay.
and then the CCNA from Cisco. I kind of wanted to get into
Mhm.
networking based on some of the certifications and training I had done. And then after I had gotten those certs, I was able to get an internship with a buddy of mine who owned his own company. doing
Hmm.
network services, providing desktop support for various small businesses, and then went
Okay.
back to college, got my associate's degree in computer networking, and then I was able to get a job right out of college doing with a managed network service provider, so doing network support, server administration, desktop support for a number of small businesses. So it was nice to get a lot of experience right from the get-go, as I was just starting out in IT.
That's awesome. And I guess like on the topic of certifications, I know I saw in your profile you also pursued a CCNP. Like what are your thoughts on, like more advanced levels? Like cuz I typically recommend the CCNA for someone who's in controls, but I guess on the IT side, I guess how difficult is it to get to those levels, right? Do you need to have real work like experience before you can get CC I think it's CCNP then CCIE, right? Like is the
Correct.
top tier one?
Yeah. So I'd say the CCNA is obviously the kind of industry gold standard still for just certifications in general to get into the IT field. I obviously started with that. I would recommend, if you don't have an IT job at the time, supplementing with some home lab or virtual lab software or labs you can buy out on the internet. There's plenty of that, to
Hmm.
get some hands-on training. That's always going to help you. For the CCNP, I really wanted to get real world experience before I went for that
Hmm.
certification. So I got a job at Phoenix in 2017, and I believe in 2018 I went for my CCNP. It's a three-part exam, or at least at the time it was. They've shifted it around a bit, but I really benefited from being in the workforce at the time, but definitely challenging. But a good certification to have if you're really in the networking realm. And then obviously CCIE is the top tier, is tough one. So I didn't decide to go to that one. But that's great to have.
Still thinking about CCIE or aiming for it and at some
No,
point?
actually, yeah. So, along the lines, and we can talk about this, but I had then shifted more to the security side of things.
Okay.
So I kind of have shifted my focus from a certification standpoint to more security certifications. So I'll probably won't go for that one. That's a significant time investment. So I'll probably just
Okay.
shift more to the security certs.
Awesome. And I guess if you could give us a better picture of what your, I guess, career development and what are you doing now
Yeah.
with Phoenix? What are your current responsibilities, role?
Yeah. So right now I'm actually in a leadership role. I'm a
Hmm.
supervisor of the network and security team here at Phoenix Contact USA. So at our company, we're a global company headquartered in Germany. So
Hmm.
I manage a team uh, that is located in Harrisburg in Pennsylvania, and we support our full Americas region for our company. So that would be Canada, US, Mexico, and South America. So I lead a team of network engineers as well as security analysts, to support our network. So routing, switching, um, wireless, and then on the security end, we've got firewalls, we've got endpoint security,
Hmm.
incident response, vulnerability management, things like that. So it's kind of a split role right now, and also a leadership role. But I still kind of get in there and help from a technical perspective just due to the workload. But as I stated earlier, it's becoming so much more security driven now. Everything is always has security at the forefront. So that's really been the main focus over the last year and a half.
Yeah, and that's great to hear, especially with some of the problems that were exposed, I guess, to everybody with incidents that we saw in the last couple of years. But no, Mike, look, that's great to hear. I really like the fact that we were able to bring someone from the IT side to speak with us,
Hmm.
especially from a company that has a huge like manufacturing focus. Because again, I think it will at least for myself, right? Like so, talking to someone who's on the OT side, demystify a lot of the best practices or at least start the conversations in that direction because I don't think we can cover all the maybe all the wide range of tools and ways to approach problems in an hour, but I really like the fact that we're going to head this way. And I guess maybe to throw you like an easy first question, again, like painting the picture from like the OT side, so someone who's trying to understand or maybe to better their cybersecurity or protection level from a plant standpoint, someone who has maybe a certain
Mhm.
grasp of what's going on the plant floor, but is looking to start a conversation with IT to maybe figure out some of these better practices, right? Like, how would you maybe approach that side, having your like IT understanding?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first step is really to start the conversation. I think sometimes in IT, at least for me, we get very focused on um, what we manage, a lot of endpoints, a lot of servers, firewalls, and stuff like that. And sometimes we might lose sight of what's going on the manufacturing floor, and what some of these solutions that are deployed, what is involved in them. So that could be, we have a desktop PC, we have a device that comes with it that needs an internet connection, so that people from an external vendor can VPN in and support the machine. So
Mhm.
if you're out on the floor and you're aware of that stuff, I think just having a conversation with IT and saying, here's what we've got, here's how it communicates. Is there anything we need to do to maybe make this secure, or make sure that we're deploying this in a secure manner? Is a really good place to start, because you have to know really what's out there in your environment, at least from an IT perspective, to be able to secure it properly. And sometimes, it's easy to lose track of that and lose sight of that. So I think that's a good logical place to begin.
And I guess to maybe like expand on that a little bit, right? From what I'm understanding, a good architectural map would be like a good point to start, because I think, maybe that's not even available in a lot of the facilities, again, in my
Yeah.
experience. So I think someone
Mhm.
typically knows the general layout on the, I want to say, on the field devices from the OT standpoint, but that's not always clear, right? And I don't know if there's maybe some tools that can help you map that. I think we spoke to Pascal and he mentioned that I think like Dragos does that, but also
Mm.
there was another
Like
company that
IDS
helps,
tools.
right? Like IDS tools. And but ultimately, I guess for that conversation to be productive, you would probably need a better understanding of what's currently out there and maybe some of the interactions they have, right? Because I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, I guess like what you're seeing, but in the current architecture, there's a lot of cross communication between like OT and IT. So let's say if I'm deploying like a SCADA system, that's gonna sit on servers that typically IT manages, right? But that needs to talk to some devices in the field. So I guess like what you're saying is we should have like a better map as the first step before we engage in some of these conversations, correct?
Yeah, I think it's always pivotal to understand what's required from a communication standpoint. If there's software that needs to go on a server, needs to talk to devices out in a plant, or something like that. Um, and one thing that is another helpful tool from an IT side to gain some visibility, is a network access control system, which is
Mhm.
kind of a big system, somewhat of an investment, but that gives you the capability to know what's plugged in where, know what devices are connected where, linking everything back to a switch port. So that can help as well. But I think, at least for me, what's helped when I interact with people, in the OT side, or somebody out on the plant floor, is, when they kind of are in the conversation with me about, hey, this is what we'd like to do. We've got this solution we're looking at implementing. Um, this is what's involved, and we can kind of talk through about what the network communications like, what the support is like from an external vendor. Does it need internet access, things like this, to make sure that we're deploying it in the proper manner. But I think, you know communicating with IT in that process is helpful, at least for me. In my experience, it has been.
Certainly, I would say doesn't happen enough. But Dave,
Right.
if I can bring you into conversation as well, because I know you have a lot of experience in this. Any thoughts, comments, maybe
Absolutely.
questions for Mike as well?
Yeah. Yeah. No, no. So I think I just want to draw one distinction before my question for the listeners. So Mike's background, as I kind of alluded to, is a little bit different because he works on the IT side of things, and then also for most of the folks that we've worked with in Phoenix, right? So most of the folks that we've worked in Phoenix have been services or product managers, and they are working without typically outside clients, right? So Mike is part of this IT group and this leadership within the IT group that actually secures the Phoenix facilities. The group globally, Mike and his specific team in the Americas, right? So I think that is an interesting distinction. And now I know, Mike, that you, when we were talking as we were coming onto the show, you were saying that you guys had gone through a process to kind of completely review what you guys were doing cyber since your time coming on. And as I was thinking of this question, it may be you guys are constantly in review of what you're doing to protect the facilities and the greater IT network. Can you share a little bit like what that experience looks like the first time, or what annual revisions look like, please?
Yeah, so there's a lot of process review and policy
Mm-hmm.
review on what's acceptable, what's not acceptable
Yep.
in the event of an incident, security incident. What what actions do we take? What severity is the incident? What constitutes a critical versus a medium security incident? So we're always kind of trying to improve our policies and procedures and make sure that
Yep.
they're well understood outside of IT. I think one of the challenges too is when you get to be a global company or a
Mm-hmm.
bigger company spread throughout the US or whatever country,
Mm-hmm.
and you have remote locations, you're reliant sometimes on IT staff at these other locations that you're not
Yep.
always in direct communication to, or somebody that's been appointed the IT contact who really doesn't have an IT background. So making sure that
Mm-hmm.
they understand what they have to do and what actions need to be taken if something happens. So we've been working on trying to improve that process in terms of here's our procedures and policies from a IT security perspective, and disseminating that throughout the company to make sure that everybody understands. I
Okay.
think that has been a big initiative, as well as some technical things that we can get into. But yeah, that's what we've been working on lately.
Absolutely. And so my understanding is that's kind of an ever evolving, ever revolving process, right? Like
Yeah.
I don't know if there's ever an end, but if there is an end, you kind of go back through and relook at what that is in order to help secure a facility. Can you maybe tell our listeners what the first couple of steps either you guys at Phoenix took in order to say, hey, this is where we were, these are the first steps we took, be it we put a firewall up and initiated some policies. What do the first steps, or what do a good couple of first steps look like organizationally wide?
Yeah, so I'd say if it's within the context of improving kind of infrastructure security,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, obviously, first step is kind of assessing where you're at.
Yep.
That can be, hey, we have one flat network, and we just plug things in, and they work. If maybe we have a firewall at the perimeter of our network, and we allow things in out to the internet, but everything internal can just talk to one another. Kind of assessing that side of it. If it's from the network security perspective, maybe assessing what devices do we have on the floor in terms of we've got these desktop machines, what operating systems are they running, what
Yep.
software are they running, um, can they be updated, things of that nature. Once you have a little bit of a picture of what you've got, and
Yep.
again, to determine that, there's various tools, asset tracking software, stuff like that. But once you
Okay.
kind of have a baseline, for us, a big initiative was network segmentation to try and
Yep.
improve some of that. So it was trying to determine, hey, we've got these sets of machines. They have an old OS installed for reasons unknown or
Yep.
specific reasons. We can't update them. Let's try and improve the security around that by putting a firewall in between those clients and the rest of the network.
Mm-hmm.
Um, kind of tackling those low-hanging fruit, but also more vulnerable systems first, and
Okay.
then kind of working your way out from there is how we approached just the whole network segmentation topic.
Okay.
Just try and hit the more vulnerable systems first, and then build upon that over time.
I like that. And then how do you guys define or determine what's the most vulnerable system? So let's say someone is coming at this. Again, a lot of the listeners are on the OT side, so maybe we're not
Yeah,
thinking about like we know it's a 30-year-old PLC and we need to put a firewall or micro segmentation or something in front of
right.
it, lest there
Yeah.
could be issues. But looking at the whole organization, how do you guys what's best practices in determining what is the most vulnerable items that you need to work on first?
Yeah. So again, this is a lot of it's contingent on knowing what's in your environment,
Yep.
asset tracking, right? And then once you
Hmm.
have that data, you can kind of assess the risk of the machines. Obviously, is a machine managed? And we kind of use that term a little loosely, but what I mean when I say managed is,
Yep.
does it get patches? Is it on a supported operating system if it's running
Okay.
Windows or whatever? Um, is it managed by an external vendor, or is it managed internally? Does the machine or sets of machines, do they need to communicate out to the internet, and
Hmm.
and do people remote into them over a
Yep.
VPN at will? Um, so kind of, trying to get an idea of the function of some of these things and if they're supported from a patching standpoint. Another
Yep.
program that's really, centered in IT is vulnerability management.
Hmm.
So vulnerability management software and scanning can tell you, okay, well, here's all your assets, here's all the vulnerabilities on your network, and you can kind of assess those based on the criticality, based on the significance of what the endpoint is, and then
Hmm.
kind of approach it from, here's the most critical, we're going to address this stuff first, and kind of work our way down. Um,
Okay.
so that's what we've been kind of, trying to improve upon, and really try and, secure things that um, aren't managed as well as we'd like to, from patching and all that kind of stuff. So
Okay.
If I can throw in a follow up, Dave, on that same like question, because I was wrestling, I guess, with the same thought. And I guess in my mind, some of those components can be determined programmatically or automatically, right? Like be automated by some kind of an aggregator that tells you, okay, well, this is this type of a PLC, and it can probably fetch some information on what the vulnerabilities are. But then I guess on the human side, in my mind, there's like some kind of a checklist of, let's say if this PLC goes down, then it probably takes out the whole line, or maybe it just takes out,
right.
like a, I don't know, like an oil machine, like in the corner that nobody really cares about. So there's, I guess, like my question is like, are there tools or maybe like more extensive like checklists that can spit out, let's say, for someone who's looking to do these assessments and figure out what's going on in their facility, that can tell them after, well, here's a score 0 to 100 of, like what the risk profile is, so that, maybe as they have that as a starting point to start addressing some of these issues. Like I'm assuming there's a tool like that, but I'm wondering, Mike, what your thoughts are.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. That goes into kind of the risk management strategy and scoring tied to that. I think I know there's charts and kind of
Mhm.
templates for how to score assets on your network in terms of business criticality, if they were to go down, safety, things like
Right.
that. If we're talking about Active Directory, domain controllers, how critical they are to that infrastructure. For us, we use a vulnerability management tool to score some of that stuff, and it's kind of
Okay.
automated within that tool. But I'm sure I don't know any off the top of my head, but I'm sure there's risk management software that you might be able to, maybe open source or something that you can load assets into and feed different data points into them and kind of score them accordingly based on their function or how critical they are to the business. But tying back into what you said, I mean, if it's a PLC and it's critical to the business, if it goes down, then there's major problems or product can't ship or something, whatever it is. That's
Mhm.
obviously going to be significant, something that you want to pay attention to, versus maybe a printer or something out on the network, you know, that's
That's-
relatively insignificant.
Dave?
No, no, I agree. I think that this is very interesting. So I guess I'm gonna ask this starting question, Mike. So
Yeah.
I think that there's a bunch of great things. So let's say someone within their medium-sized organization is saying, October, Cybersecurity Awareness Month. Oh crap, we should probably be more aware on cybersecurity. What's the best first step? What's the best, first two or three steps? Is it we go and we bring in an outside group and we conduct an audit, and then based on the audit, we pick the right tools and we put a firewall? What are the good first, two or three steps if someone is starting from let's call it scratch or near scratch?
Yeah. Well, I guess hitting off of the kind of concept of Cybersecurity Awareness Month and what it's
Hmm.
trying to achieve, it's trying to bring awareness. I think a great first step is to educate staff on common security, attacks that happen. Obviously, the number one being phishing, um,
Hmm.
but having some type of initiative within the business to make people aware of cybersecurity and common things that they might run into as part of their daily job, I think is really really helpful. I mean, a lot of these
Yep.
attacks are, we see things in the news and it's very, we read it and it seems so sophisticated, like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that happened. These hackers are so advanced. A lot of these
Hmm.
things, they occur, just from a simple phishing email, where they get credentials,
Yep.
or some misconfiguration. So I think that's a great first step.
Okay.
Obviously, if you're a smaller business, and you don't maybe have a full IT department, a security team, a network team, a server team, I'd say consulting with an outside organization to do an audit or to do an assessment to tell you
Hmm.
where you're at with some of these things. Um, how's your network segmentation look? Is it a flat network? Are there firewalls? How does the endpoint look? Do you have endpoint security software on all these devices? Um,
Hmm.
what devices do you have out on the floor? How are they functioning? What uh, what touch points do they have to the rest of the network or to the internet? Um, that's obviously a good step.
Yep.
And if you're, maybe a little more mature,
Hmm.
from an IT side, I think it's kind of building out, either it's a vulnerability management program, building out, more of an incident response program for how to deal with security threats that come in. Um, but I think a lot of it can be boiled down to, maybe even improving on some of these simpler things like security awareness, just within the organization. So, yeah, it's a good place to start.
Let me ask you, I guess, like maybe an expanded question on that, right? Because I've seen education done like in a number of ways, and me and Dave even spoke to people who are involved in cybersecurity, like training slash
Hmm.
awareness. And I think like the question, I guess, like for me is, what's the low hanging fruit, right? Because I've been part of initiatives where, for example, they send you phishing emails, and then if you click on that
Hmm.
email, there's a report generated to your manager, or they just have like a conversation or send an email blast right to everyone. Well, you have to use like more secure passwords, not use like outside USBs, and just general practices. But what has like maybe worked, or what would you opt for as like a first step, like educational medium for cybersecurity? What communication medium, I guess, works?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think we've fallen victim to the traditional email, but we do partner with a company where we incorporate kind of fun little videos. They're more kind of
Okay.
cartoon based, but
Okay.
they're simplified and they're not super long or extensive, but they really get the message across of, like what phishing is and what social
Mm-hmm.
engineering is in general. So, you know, video content that we host or something or partner with a company, email communication is the easy one. There's a lot of managed service providers from the security awareness side where they'll gamify this
Yep.
this
Mm-hmm.
this initiative so that way people are a little more engaged and make it a little bit competitive in terms of friendly competition within the workplace in terms of identifying what phishing emails are. But I think another strategy we've used um, to try and um, gain buy-in to why do you care about cybersecurity, not just for the business, but
Mm-hmm.
more personally as well. So we monitor a lot of the news, the security news, and obviously vulnerabilities are coming out every day with IoT devices. This all of a sudden spans to a lot of different homes. People have, Amazon Alexa or they have a smart fridge or
Mm-hmm.
whatever. So they're a lot more connected than they used to be. So we like
Mm-hmm.
to monitor the news and send out emails that maybe aren't specific to our business or some phishing campaign that we're seeing at our company, but that
Mm-hmm.
people might be concerned about at their home if, for example, some particular vendor has a data breach. Let's say it's a social media company or whatever. We'll send communication out about that. Hey, FYI, this happened. You might want to change your passwords. Here's how to validate maybe if your credentials were compromised and they're out on the internet somewhere. So to try and get that personal tie with some of our staff so that maybe, you know, there's a little bit more incentive to care when it is a campaign going around within the business that just affects them at work. Um, we also want to make sure that they're aware of things that they might be affected outside of work. So that's been a strategy we've been trying to employ, and I think it does really go over well in terms of buy-in.
I really like that. I must say I'm involved in a number of initiatives, and I would say like I have more difficult times depending on who the audience is communicating the good
Mm-hmm.
cybersecurity practices. But again, I think it goes back to the point of like your weakest link is going to be what like breaks you, right? And so you
Yeah.
really need to, I think of the overall strategy, right? Because if it's someone like on the plant floor who may not get buy-in, and again, incidentally or unintentionally, maybe plugs in their phone or their laptop, and that's what causes your system to break, then it's just, I guess, unfortunate miss on your end to have like not taught them well enough. So I certainly
Yeah.
appreciate those points. A lot of
Ye-
thoughts from me.
Yeah, it's tough. It really is. And I don't really blame anybody, for not being
Mm-hmm.
as up to speed. I mean, some of this stuff, it's really, I mean, even for me or for anybody else, it's tough to keep up with everything. But if you're not um, actively monitoring things or up to speed on a lot of these different attacks, it can be easy to forget or just not think about something and it turns into a security issue. But um, I think realizing that and trying to work with everybody as best you can, that's kind of our goal. Not to just say, here's a phishing email, you clicked on it, you shouldn't have done that. You know,
Mm-hmm.
that's not good. You're going to hurt the company. Just, being a little more understanding, but still trying to get the message across.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that makes sense. Mike, if we want to, I guess like I have a technology based question, right? So I'm curious on the maybe the tool side when it comes to monitoring the traffic going in to the plant and sort of, I guess like again from the OT side, if we have like a funnel that transmits that data to like my PLCs and my SCADA systems on the floor, how can let's say the IT department be able to like monitor the traffic that's coming in? Because again, I'll paint you like the picture of which happens quite frequently. Again, in my experience, you have the need to, let's say, deploy a like wireless device that would funnel some of the data through or bypass, let's say, the network, or let's say somebody brings in a laptop to program like an obsolete system. How can you monitor, like what's going on and what's coming through your funnel? I've always been like curious, like on that side. I know that
No.
like one of the tools mentioned is like Wireshark. Is there other ways, or kind of where would you begin I want to say like an investigation and what's happening on your network?
Yeah, we so a lot of what we use for logging and whatnot is a lot of firewalls.
Mhm.
In terms of our corporate firewalls, um, logging all traffic going to, in and out. But if you're talking about maybe there's an mguard or something, between, the IT infrastructure and the OT infrastructure, leveraging features on that like syslog and pumping those logs to a SIM or a centralized logging server is a good
Mhm.
idea. And that's just a configuration item in like an mguard or something to say, hey, send logs to this IP address or whatever, or this system. There are other products to monitor traffic. You could have like
Mhm.
an inline um, network intrusion detection monitor that just is kind of like a network tap, so you could see all traffic going to it. It's kind of like a pass-through device, but it sees all communication in line and flag on certain types of communication. But I think the simplest way for that is put a layer 3 device, firewall or whatever, in between whatever network you're trying to secure, and sending those logs to a central location, typically a SIM, or just deploy firewalls where you can throughout the rest of the infrastructure and log that type of traffic. There's switch ports you can span to say, hey, I want to monitor all traffic on this switch port and pump it out to this one. But I'd
Mhm.
say from the OT side, if we're talking about mguards and firewalls, kind of wanting to configure those in a way where you're sending all logs to a certain centralized area, is always good to do. So that way everything's kind of aggregated.
Could you determine, I guess, like I'm becoming like more and more curious on what that traffic looks like, but can you determine what the like device that well, I guess you can probably see what the IP address or maybe the MAC address that the intended packet is going to, but can you determine what the device added is? And I guess I don't know, is that going to be like on the firewall side? Is that going to be some other tools? What do the logs like tell you? Is someone even, again, like from the OT perspective, like is someone even watching those logs, right? Because I think
Right.
I know that like they can be set up, but like what's maybe the process then to make sure that like nothing bad happens? And I guess like as a follow-up question, and sorry to make it so convoluted, then like what does the
It's okay.
process of, let's say, me deploying a new device that needs to communicate, let's say, and allow me remote access become, right?
Mm. Yeah, so one technology that we leverage and that's very common for, when something gets plugged in, what is it? Is what I mentioned a little earlier, network access control, where you have a system where all of your network infrastructure is tied back to. So every single switch port is monitored, for lack of a better term, so that when something gets connected somewhere, we get an alert and say, hey, this is connected here. Now, it's not an alert every single time, but you can detect maybe what the device is based on like the MAC OUI, so the vendor OUI, based on the MAC address. Um, so we leverage that in terms of, what devices are connected and where are they connected to. There's some limitations with that. If you, for example, add a switch somewhere, or if there's an mguard or a firewall, and then there's a switch in front of that, and our NAC system isn't extended out there, you lose some visibility. But again, with logging, like, yeah, you could get, hey, this MAC address showed up, and you can kind of try and probe for more information. And then I believe you had a follow-up question or a secondary part of that.
Yes.
And
I guess to repeat that, what the process would be, if let's say we're in total lockdown like that, right? Like where you have to approve like each MAC address. So what would be the process
Mm.
of me wanting to get,
Ah,
a
yes.
device on the floors to so that it acts like allows me to, let's say, like remote in into one of the
Ah,
OT
right.
side devices.
Yeah, I mean, we try and authorize those devices that aren't, I guess, managed, if you will. So it's not a corporate Windows desktop or laptop. Um, for us, it's more of a, hey, what's this device? Let's authorize it so that can actually connect to the network. Another thing we see a lot is, you know, does this device have a need for two network connections? Maybe one
Hmm.
connection is on the inside or the internal network, the other connection is to some isolated network that's specific to this machine or this manufacturing process. And then through that little network, it needs internet access, and people can get in and manage. So, um, as I was saying earlier, for us, it's understanding what those use cases are, and like when somebody needs to connect something, things are configured in a way where generally they have to put in a request to say, hey, I'm connecting this, like it needs to get on the right network. And then we say, okay, well, what is it doing? How is it being used? It gives us an opportunity to kind of have that conversation. Because if people connect things and we don't know about it, we don't know about it. It can go undetected, and then that's where you start to see issues. So we leverage that a network access control system for a lot of those functions.
And is that like an off-the-shelf system or network access control? Is that I guess, is there some providers of that, or what does that look like exactly? I'm not
Yeah, I
familiar.
mean, it's an extensive system.
Right.
There's various industry leaders that make network access control systems. Um, it's significant of a deployment if you want to leverage a system like that, because it really it's really a system that you have to integrate all of your networking hardware with. So all of your
Okay.
switches, even firewalls, access points. We want to think about anything that gets connected to the network this system has to know about it. This NAC system has to know about it. So it spans everywhere. So, and there's a lot of logic built into these systems. If this system gets connected,
Hmm.
it gets on this network. If this system gets connected, it gets on this other network. So that all has to be built out. It's definitely an involved process. I would say you need a good amount of staff in terms of IT to be able to, I'd say, implement it and then support it ongoing, depending on how
Interesting.
big you are as a company. But it's just such a step up in security. Sometimes you worry about if somebody gets access somewhere, um, plugging in,
Right.
and if they can just get right on the network, it's definitely an issue. Or if it's not intended to be malicious, where a vendor comes in and they plug in thinking they need to get out to the internet, and something's on their machine and they get on the production network and something happens as a result. Um, yeah, we want to try and prevent against that stuff. But yeah, there's a lot of different vendors for network access control.
No, that's very interesting. To be honest with you, I guess, like, again, I can only speak to the at least OT side, but the general, I want to say, process would be to log into the closest switch and kind of figure out what has been added or like why it's having an issue, right? So it could be, again, like, let's say on the Allen Bradley side, like a static switch, and you can kind of get into it, which you can do with a Cisco or HP or anything, any other switch
Hmm.
for that matter, and kind of look at the switch itself. Versus, I didn't know that there was an aggregation tool. And again, obviously in the
Yeah,
IT world, I think it's a lot more advanced, but it's good to
yeah,
know.
it's kind of a centralized database, if you will, of what's connected where. And a lot of industrial switches, if they have certain feature set, are supported in a lot of these systems. So we can leverage some of those switches into the and integrate them into these systems, so that way we can further expand visibility. I think that's a huge common goal, is just visibility
Mhm.
and what's connected where.
Absolutely. I could see the benefits of that. Dave, any thoughts, comments, questions?
I have lots of thoughts, Vlad, but before I kind of take us into a slightly other direction, we actually have some people to thank, right? So we
Yep.
want to thank Phoenix Contact for sponsoring this theme and all of their support. We talked about it a little bit, right? And Mike's kind of alluded to it. So Phoenix it's a global company, global market leader based in Germany. They produce future-oriented components, systems, and solutions for electrical controls, networking, and automation. With a worldwide network reaching more than 100 companies and over 17,100 employees, they maintain a close relationship with the customers, something that we believe is essential for our shared success. And I'm just going to take a brief pause here and just say, think how difficult Mike and all of Mike's counterparts' jobs are if they've got to secure 100 countries and more than 17,000 people. And I'd imagine they have at least a couple of lads on their payroll. And we've talked about we've talked about secret laptops on the OT floor before, Mike. And so you certainly have your job cut out for you. So their wide variety of innovative products makes it easy for our customers to implement the latest technology in various applications and industries, focusing on the fields of energy, infrastructure, process, and factory automation. So we're going to talk a little bit about the MGuard, and Grant gave us a great overview last week. So the FL MGuard product family as a proven security technology that enables you to control, safeguard communications within your production network. This is the cornerstone of a holistic approach to properly secure your OT network. The central management software, MGuard Device Manager, enables easy and efficient system configuration, maintenance, and operation, especially when a large number of MGuard security routers are installed. Thanks to a wide variety of product versions, we offer the right product for every application. Talking about a couple of advantages, and Grant gave us a bit of an overview last week. So if you guys missed that, we'll go ahead and link to that in the comments. Of the actual differences between the MGuard, he actually had like half a dozen of them in front of him at one point. So the advantages of a bunch of the product families is gigabit data rate. Security is part of the entire product lifecycle, from the certified development process in accordance with IEC 62243-4-1 to the integration of important security functions. Low vulnerability of MGuard devices due to hardening and the application of secure by design principles. PSIRT, which I Googled and stands for Product Security Incident Response Team, monitors vulnerabilities on a daily basis. These are evaluated and rectified based upon the severity of the problem, plus robust and secure connectivity to your machines via the most complete line of VPN-enabled devices, coupled with a new version of MGuard Secure Cloud v2.14, conforming to MIIT category IB14. And again, we want to thank Phoenix Contact for sponsoring this theme and all of your continued support within the community. So Mike, I want to kind of take a bit of a different tangent, right? So I feel like we've been peppering you on a lot of specifics and technology and how can we go find things and what are the first steps. But I feel like we would almost be negligent in having a defensive cybersecurity conversation if we didn't talk about risk mitigation, but also risk acceptance. And I'm going to preface this because the first time the term risk acceptance came up, I think I saw all of the blood drain out of Vlad's face, right? But can you kind of give us an overview of maybe on the corporate IT side, what risk mitigation is, maybe how you go determine the risk and what risk mitigation is and what risk acceptance is and what it looks like, please?
Yeah. So I think from the risk mitigation, I mean, obviously a lot of this starts with determining what the risk is. So a lot of the way to do that is to really understand, what servers, what devices are out there, how critical they are to the business in terms of being able to function. Maybe there's safety concerns related to this hardware, stuff that's connected to the network, and or maybe it's just systems that are not able to be patched or maintained, and then present a risk from a compromise to the IT systems at your business. So I think it's doing an assessment of your assets and gathering data. So from a vulnerability standpoint, you can gather that data. Tools within systems like that can give you a score. There's scores, templates that you can use out on the internet to kind of say, hey, if it's again, if we're talking about like Active Directory, if it's a domain controller, it gets this. If it's
Yep.
this system and it does this function, it gets this score. So it really requires you to kind of know the network, and know what's important, and what is maybe not as important. So determining the risk is obviously number one, and then to mitigate it's a lot of the things that I talked about. You can go at it from a software standpoint, where you're talking about, maybe it's an endpoint security, maybe it's a logging and monitoring system, um, maybe it's network segmentation, um,
Yep.
maybe it's employee training, um, corporate awareness training, things like that from a security side. Um, Even just improving policies and procedures so that people are better informed and know how to react when things happen. So there's a lot of controls that can be put into place from a technical perspective. And then, as I was saying, you know, going into like the people, processes, and technologies,
Yep.
awareness training and training staff on what to look out for is a good way to also mitigate just general risk. Um, and yeah, and risk acceptance, I mean, it's pretty straightforward. Kind of choosing to accept, a certain level of risk based on the nature of what you have. So sometimes you have applications that are very old and are critical to the business, and for factors, like cost or um various reasons, it can't be updated, or nothing can be done, or hey, we got to plan this out for 2, 3, 4 years down the road. For now, it is what it is. And that's how they kind of tie together, in that we put things to try and mitigate the risk, but at a certain level we've accepted, hey, there's nothing we can do. This is the application we're running, and for various reasons we can't update it. So that's definitely a really very real thing. It sounds very
Yep.
scary in terms of, why would you want
Yep.
to do that? Why would you want to accept the risk? Why don't you just try and fix everything? But in the real world of it, there's things that your hands are a little tied sometimes, for various reasons. So I think that's how they kind of relate to one another.
Yeah.
And we're always kind of trying to, you know, mitigate as much as possible.
Absolutely. No, I think that is good. Can we talk a little bit more maybe about risk of acceptance? So we've had questions and conversations in the past of saying, hey, maybe we work at a facility that isn't cyber aware, right?
Mhm.
Maybe we're not paying attention to it. And it's difficult to have these conversations because it's like, hey, boss, we need to go spend $10,000 on this, or we need to go spend $100,000 on this, or we need to go spend $5 million on, whatever these big next steps are. So when you guys are having these conversations internally, how do you go about deciding what risk to accept versus what we're going to spend money to mitigate? Like,
That's a great
is there a
question.
structure that you've found?
Yeah,
Is there a structure that you guys have?
there's I wouldn't say there's anything explicitly
Yep.
defined. I think naturally the goal is to try to avoid risk acceptance for very critical parts of the business, or
Yeah.
again, if it depends what industry you're in, but things that involve safety or things like
Mm-hmm.
that, it's really tough to go around. But it can happen even with critical business applications or things that, hey, we need to have this running to be able to ship product or whatever, there can be reasons as to why we can't uh, update or change out the system because
Mm-hmm.
of cost.
Yeah.
And again, sometimes it is even a little bit above my head, my level,
Mm-hmm.
from the technical side. Sometimes it can just be, more of a business decision. And again,
Mm-hmm.
that's where it kind of comes into play. Hey, we know there's these issues, but we just we don't have the money, or we don't want to, change this at the current time. So, um, yeah, we don't have like a, I guess, explicitly defined um, guideline in terms of
Yeah.
what we're accepting versus not. But
Mm-hmm.
obviously, the goal is to try and limit that as much as possible.
Absolutely. I asked the question, right? Because it's a difficult question for
Yeah,
everyone, internal or external. At some point, we accept risk, right? So we accept risk whether we know we're accepting the risk or we don't know we're
right.
accepting the risk. But at some point, we all accept risk. For me at least, and I'll let Vlad chime in after this. It's been interesting kind of get everyone's thoughts and feedback on where we as an internal business unit or clients accept risk, and how to go about having those conversations of, hey, saying we need to go spend some money so we are so we are less so there's less risk, and or we need to go spend some money because we don't pay any attention to cybersecurity. And Vlad just plugged his third laptop into to a different switch, and only God knows what he is currently using. But what are your thoughts on risk acceptance, Vlad, and asking people for money for cybersecurity things?
No, I mean, I think it's generally understood. I think dilemma that at the end of the day, I don't think you can ever put enough protection to make sure that there's absolutely zero risk. But you're obviously there's like a
Mm-hmm.
threshold where it becomes economically, how to say it, I guess not necessarily not feasible, but it's not worth it at some point, right? Where like you have to spend
Mm-hmm.
so much money to mitigate a certain number of risk that you would just rather say like, okay, well, fine, like this system could get hacked, and we're willing to just say like it is what it is, right? Like I guess would be the
Yep.
best way to put it. So in my mind, I guess there's no illusion that a skilled hacker, or I guess like a malicious enough software could certainly get into probably any virtual system, right? And it's only a
Absolutely.
what was the way like Pascal, I guess, put it, is you need to make sure that you slow it down enough, or like you make it hard enough for it not to get to your critical systems, but
Mm-hmm.
ultimately it can never be like a 100% like bulletproof method. So I agree with that premise. Again, like for me, the biggest like question is like how do you figure that out? And again, with someone who's not necessarily as knowledgeable on the like IT
Mm-hmm.
side, trying to get like those first steps. And I think like I guess like initial conversations to the point where again maybe the conclusion is we bring someone who's a lot more knowledgeable, or maybe like we at least like have done the legwork enough to
Yep.
begin talking about it and starting the ball rolling, so to speak. Because again, from my experience, there's not enough of these conversations in a lot of the facilities, and so everyone is just kind of in the mindset where like we don't know where to begin, and so not much has been done, right? Like that's at least like what I've seen in
Yeah, I think, Vlad, I think you're spot on in terms of the risk acceptance
Mm-hmm.
logic, where if the time and resources and the cost to actually mitigate the risk is far greater than um,
Mm-hmm.
you know the um, the benefit to or the chance that it might be exploited, it's worth accepting it, or something like that. um
Mm-hmm.
and another area where I think, you definitely don't want to accept risk is with a lot of compliance related stuff.
Yeah.
So depending on what industry you're in, there's a lot of compliance requirements, and that's something that we're not bound to given our industry. um but obviously healthcare and stuff like that, they have different requirements. So
No, and again, like there's a lot of gray areas, and as you've pointed out, right, like it's business dependent, it's like function dependent. Like there's a lot of parties that need to get involved to have these conversations. But that's why I
Hmm.
think it's such a like a gray area that requires discussion, and I think that's why maybe there's a lot of tension between like IT and OT sides because not enough of these conversations happen. And again, like we can certainly like get into this conversation too, but it needs to happen early enough in the project for everyone to be able to kind of
Right.
chime in, right? Because a lot of times it's kind of last minute. I'm going to bring you in, and hey, Mike, I'm throwing up this these like devices on the plant floor because I need to
Yes.
remote in, and you're kind of like, well, what the hell? Like we need like a week to prepare for this, and
Yeah, I
it's like,
that's such
Yep.
a great point. I think that happens a lot. I mean, that right there is like a core of sometimes challenges is being brought
Hmm.
in too late. So we have all these security controls and things, these processes we have, and then if we don't really have time to really implement that properly, it's like, hey, we need to get this running. We have people on site. They're here 3 days. They're here to do this job, and then they're flying out.
Yep.
We got to make this work. So what happens is you end up putting exceptions in place. It's like, oh well, we normally do it this way, but we're gonna pass on that. We just got to get it working. So that
Yep.
definitely happens.
Hmm.
Like, I'm curious on your thoughts, and this is kind of part of the, I guess, last questions, but ultimately I want to ask it in a different way, right? So, as we're seeing this like digital transformation, industry 4.0 kind of
Hmm.
initiatives, like whatever you want to call it, but I think there's a lot more networking devices coming in, certainly at the OT level, right? Which ultimately impacts the traffic, probably the hardware and the software that you need to monitor that, to secure it. But I guess like what are your like perspectives, I want to say, like on the technical challenges, but also, on the personnel challenges? Like are you seeing, at least, like what I'm witnessing is that more PLC and HMI programmers are now having to have some IT networking knowledge versus like, do you think that
Hmm.
should fall more on like the IT side? Like what are your thoughts from like maybe the human perspective first, as we quote unquote throw more connected devices on the OT side?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think um, I think we need to know what the device is doing, what's its intent,
Hmm.
how it's connected, and how the communication works before we connect anything to the network. So whether that's consulting with somebody in IT to be able to say, no, I don't like that, or can we do it another way, or
Hmm.
we can do it this way, but we have to set it up and connect it in a certain manner to make sure it's secure. Um, or having somebody, that isn't in IT that kind of knows what questions to
Hmm.
ask. I think that's yeah, I think you need that absolutely, because I think sometimes it's, hey, this is going to do all this. We're going to get all this analytics, or we're going to be able to do all this fancy stuff.
Hmm.
But it's really, and justifiable, right? We want the business to function better and to get
Yeah.
more information and get data and all that. But
Hmm.
sometimes you can lose, like, well, is this really deployed in a secure manner? So
Yeah.
yeah, I think the questions have to be asked, whether they're by IT or somebody dealing directly with the device.
And I'm really curious, like on that point. And again, it's like a personal reflection slash question, but
Hmm.
I'm curious if the like IT knowledgeable people are going to migrate a bit more into the OT side, because again, I think there's more and more devices coming onto like the OT side networks, and I guess like I've not seen a lot of people being extremely knowledgeable on that side when setting up
Yeah.
these networks. So I'm not sure how that knowledge will proliferate, you know what I mean? Like, and I think
Yeah.
like Pascal mentioned, like he
Yeah.
would want to see someone who's got kind of like the plant floor experience to be trained up on the
Hmm.
IT side.
Yeah.
But I don't know if the vice versa could also work, you know what I mean? So I'm just maybe like curious on your thoughts on how we're gonna see the change in landscape, and how that operates.
Yeah, I would love to see it. I think that's an area for me that I've expressed interest in terms of, I'm internal to the business, so it would be nice
Hmm.
to be involved more in terms of, hey, we're selling this MGuard, or we're selling this product, and see kind of the various deployments that businesses have, and maybe kind of think, hey, is this being deployed in a secure way or whatever. I also think, maybe some of this needs to be integrated more in terms of some of the training or some of the schooling that's available in
Mhm.
terms of OT. I mean, a lot of it is, I mean, security is security, but um, you still have a lot of training and stuff that's centralized to more of an IT environment. So
Mhm.
how to secure OT environments in the real world, I think, is something that we could benefit more from a training aspect.
I
Okay.
would certainly agree. Dave, thoughts, comments, ideas?
No, no. So I like all of this. I think that this is a really good kind of series of conversations. I will say so. Mike talked a bit about framework. I'll say NIST has a fairly good cybersecurity framework that I know people, especially on the OT side, have used. I have gone down that path. It helps you go and self-assess as to where you are. And one of the positives about that framework is it asks, what is worst case scenario? And especially in many of our facilities, if someone were to in theory get in and hack into the facility, there is a huge number of dollars worth of risk, and people can die. And so I
That's
think
a
that
government
at
developed
the end of the
framework?
day,
Sorry to interrupt you. NIST and
NIST,
IST?
yes, NIST has a cybersecurity has a cybersecurity framework. You guys can quite literally Google NIST cybersecurity framework. It'll bring it generally right up. It's got a list of questions. I know a number of groups have gone and built tools to help go through those questions, because the questions themselves are, while not necessarily confusing, are a bit difficult to like go through the process to self-assess and then get any sort of score out of. But I would say, if nothing else, that is a good place in order to go start. I do have one question for Mike before we go and ask kind of the last series of questions. But Mike, I mean, you are the IT cybersecurity expert, certainly in this conversation, probably in all of the conversations. What questions should we be asking on the OT side? What questions should we be asking the IT people before we go and fly flat in to go plug in a bunch of laptop computers, or just in general?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I think again, I go back to, based on my experiences, making sure that they're kept aware of
Yep.
what you're looking to do and what you're connecting to
Mhm.
the network, and really kind of how it's working.
Mhm.
And like the questions I ask um, are there any requirements for external support to get into the device remotely and troubleshoot or manage? That's an important question, because you're
Mhm.
starting to talk about outside people, of the organization connecting in to support something, and then, they can do, whatever, if they wanted to act maliciously. So
Mhm.
just gathering kind of what is the device doing, sharing that with IT, keeping them in the loop on that. And generally, I mean, I think they would be very happy on that, and hopefully they'll be very accommodating in telling you, hey, this is how we want to connect it and make sure everything's secure. So just kind of reaching out and having a conversation about, what you're doing, what you're connecting is
Mhm.
just is good to share. I think that's what we look for.
Absolutely. No, no, thank you. I think that is helpful. So we've had a number of conversations about ITOT convergence. I think that this is the most calm conversation that we've ever had about it, and one of the very few that we've had an IT professional on. So thank you for that, Mike.
Mhm.
So we always ask people what they think. We always ask people to predict the future and what you guys think the future looks like. So coming from your perspective, Mike, what does the future look like, either of IT or ITOT convergence or cybersecurity? Kind of the floor is open to you to go make some of these predictions.
That's a good question. I think it's a difficult question because things change so much. Um,
Mhm.
I'm cautiously optimistic. I think, attackers and threats and like pieces of malware will continue to get more advanced. Um, but I also think there's so many people um, really trying to defend against this stuff,
Mhm.
and developing really amazing products. Lots of AI now where,
Mhm.
it's able to kind of detect a lot of these things. It's not
Yep.
foolproof, but yeah, I mean, I definitely think it's never going to go away, and you're never going to be able to mitigate everything. But
Mhm.
I'm optimistic in being able to prevent as much as possible, and
Yeah.
also to promote this type of work. I think it oftentimes can get very intimidating, if going into cybersecurity or thinking about cybersecurity, because you're always thinking about these very advanced attacks, or maybe what's in the movies or what you hear in the
Mhm.
news. But really, the industry's great, and it's for a lot of people, and you don't have to start off as an expert. I mean, everybody's
Yep.
always learning. So I'm optimistic, I'd say.
Okay.
It's a
Okay.
good stance.
I guess as a follow up, and the conversation we've had with Pascal was a bit surprising with his prediction, but I'm wondering, I guess, if putting an analogy, do you think we're building walls faster than the quote unquote enemies are building cannons, or you think we're
Mm.
going to see darker times
Uh,
before?
I mean, I think there will always be cases of significant breaches and
Mhm.
compromises. Yeah. I think the one challenge is um we have there's a group of people trying to defend a network that know, a lot of the advanced techniques that come in. But if you're a bad guy, sometimes it's just getting somebody to click on a link, and
Mhm.
that's really tough to defend against.
Right.
So, that's always going to be an attack avenue, because we're all
Mhm.
integrated, and we work on technology a lot with our jobs. So to try and prevent everything there, it's tough. So yeah, it might that analogy might be true. um but it's always a cat and mouse game, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. Mike, I'm going to tell you the same thing I've told the last two people after their predictions. Well, your prediction was generally positive, but then Vlad asked you this question, and I feel like we're just going to have to stop asking people talking to cybersecurity professionals to predict the future, because every time Vlad has something to say about it, it feels kind of bleak. But we do appreciate your prediction. We do appreciate your prediction, nonetheless. Next question for you is some content recommendation. I know we were talking about cybersecurity. You were saying that a lot of good places are perhaps more on the YouTube side than on the and other blogs and things like that, as opposed to paper books, because just how fast everything happens. So do you have some
Yeah.
content recommendations for us, please?
Yeah. So one website that we use a lot, just to get a up to date on vulnerabilities that happen, different attacks, things that happen, is called Threat Post. It's a website that has a lot of good information, just general to cybersecurity. They also have a
Mm-hmm.
podcast on there, and it's a short one. It's like 15 to 30 minutes, and generally they'll have very specific topics to discuss. So if
Mm-hmm.
there's a breach somewhere, like a couple years ago, there was the big SolarWinds
Yeah.
supply chain attack. They had a whole podcast on that. I thought that was fascinating. So they have a lot of good content there. I do use YouTube a lot for a
Mm-hmm.
lot of cybersecurity information, or just really technical information. So there's YouTube channels. I follow somebody named John Hammond, not any tie-in with Jurassic Park,
Okay.
but he's really cool. He does a lot of malware analysis. He also
Okay.
does just basic hacking stuff, fundamentals. Um, it's a great channel to kind of get into, get excited, I guess, about what
Yeah.
you can do in this field. There's another one too called David Bombal. He has a
Mm-hmm.
big YouTube channel, and he has a lot of segments where he interviews people, uh, and asks, what do you recommend to get into cybersecurity? So I always find that stuff interesting if you're starting
Absolutely.
off or want a career change or something like that. So those are
What's
some
the second
channels I
channel
like.
name? Sorry.
Um, So his name's David Bombel, Bombel, I believe. And yeah, he's got a lot of good content out there, a lot of
Awesome.
interviews with people in the field.
We'll have all the links, as I
Absolutely.
mentioned sometimes in the on the website section. If you're listening to this, if in podcast form and unable to access the YouTube at this time, we'll have all the links posted.
Absolutely. And I would say I think that that drives us into the next question. So thank you for setting this up, Mike. We're always looking for some career advice. So outside of David Bombel's YouTube channel, if someone's looking to get into cybersecurity, maybe on the IT side, maybe on the OT side, what are your best recommendations?
So for me personally, I always wanted to have more of a foundational knowledge of general
Hmm.
IT. So
Yep.
as I mentioned at the beginning, I started off more with a networking background. Um, so I always wanted to know kind of the general, how do things communicate on a
Hmm.
network and what's involved if you log into your machine, how does all that work in the back end? So that's what my approach was. But as I also stated, I think certifications are a great way to kind of
Yeah.
start the knowledge process and get some credentials to maybe get a very entry level position.
Yep.
Um, but along with the training side and the real world experience, I think having a home lab or going to some of these sites, Try Hack Me is one. Um,
Hmm.
where you can go through labs, go through training. They explain all this kind of stuff. It's really interesting and it's very cheap, very affordable. You don't need to go to
Hmm.
college for some of this stuff. Um,
Yeah.
just to get in, just to get really kind of excited about it. So um, having a home network where maybe you have a machine, maybe you have an old laptop where you run like
Hmm.
Kali Linux or something. There's a really another good training. It's called Security Blue Team. I kind of wanted to
Yeah.
plug that because um, that is a if we're talking about blue team defensive
Yeah.
security, that training is amazing. It's not
Mhm.
very well known, but
Okay.
I came across that. It's called Security Blue Team. They have 3 levels of certifications you do. Everything is practical, so it's not
Okay.
a multiple choice, choose the best answer. It's, hey,
Mhm.
show me how you would respond to this incident. How would you gather these forensics? All this kind of
Yeah.
cool stuff. So those are some training kind of nuggets that I would recommend for somebody trying to get into the field and don't feel intimidated by like the term cybersecurity or hacking or anything like that. It's really I wouldn't let that turn you away.
Yeah. Awesome. No, no. So I like that. And then as a follow-up, so I know that you said that you were especially as you were studying for your certification, specifically getting that hands-on practical experience. Do you have a recommendation for a good home lab setup if someone is looking to get started either on I don't know what a home lab looks like for some of
Sure.
this stuff. So do you have some recommendations for that, please?
Yeah, I mean the most basic setup I would say is if you have a desktop machine and you have it can't be very low on resources, so decent amount of memory and a decent
Yep.
CPU. You could run VMware Workstation and have just a Windows 10 image VM virtual machine that you can
Hmm.
run on your own desktop and not really have to buy any hardware. But if you want to buy hardware, you could just, or even just use an old desktop. You could have that as a kind of a machine that you can like as a server or whatever. And then you can have like a laptop as well and load Kali Linux or some of these open source operating systems that have more of a
Hmm.
security focus. Um, but for me, I buy, firewalls and switches and, you know, hardware to support virtual machines and stuff like that. So
Awesome.
I've kind of gone a little bit overboard sometimes with that, but it can be very basic. Even just to get like maybe a cheaper like firewall, just to start
Yeah.
learning, what's involved in a firewall and adding rules and seeing traffic go through and whatnot. I think that's a good place to start.
No, I love that. And I love that because if anyone's looking behind Vlad, you'll know that he and I have never gone overboard on anything ever in the past. No, that's awesome, Mike. Thank you so much for that. And then I guess the last question for you is who should reach out to you? Who do you want to connect with? Is your area of Phoenix looking to hire? Who do you want to have conversations with? Kind of any and all of what we can do to help you.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a huge social media presence, but I am on
Mhm.
LinkedIn. So I'd say, anybody, if you have questions about any of the content or
Mhm.
information, um, we are growing in terms of our business, a
Okay.
lot. So we're always posting jobs, maybe not always on the IT side, but we do have a
Yeah.
lot of interns that we have for just service desk or kind of getting your feet wet in IT positions.
Yep.
But overall, as a company, we have a lot of open positions. So you can check out our website for those. But yeah, it's good. It's good to be growing.
Awesome.
No, it is. So thank you so much for this conversation, Mike. It has been amazing. Thank you for everyone listening to us here on Manufacturing Hub. If you are listening on podcast form, please go rate us 5 stars, subscribe, do all of those things. I have found that if I ask people to download more podcasts, you guys subscribe and download more podcasts, which means that more people find us and listen, which is always amazing. If you're watching us on Solus PLC, hit that thumbs up and smash that subscribe button. I think that's what we're supposed to say on YouTube like 12 years ago, Vlad. And if you guys are listening to us on LinkedIn, thank you very much for that. Please feel free to follow me, Manufacturing Hub Network, Vlad, and Mike. And we will catch everyone live next Wednesday. Until then, we'll see you all soon. Thank you.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Mike. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.